When someone has constant access to your time, energy, and affection, it can begin to feel like a given rather than a gift. The more available you are, the more your presence becomes the norm. What was once exciting and valuable turns into background noise. This isn't because you're doing something wrong, far from it. It's because human psychology tends to devalue things we assume will always be there. When you're consistently reaching out, showing interest, always saying yes, or always initiating connection, your attention loses its sense of rarity. And it's rarity that often gives something its perceived worth. In the early stages of attraction or dating, there's an excitement around unpredictability, around wondering what the other person is thinking or feeling. It's not about playing hard to get, but about emotional pacing. When one person is overly available while the other is still trying to find their own feelings, it can create an imbalance. That imbalance makes the more available person seem less intriguing, not because their value has diminished, but because their energy is now expected rather than appreciated. This is where a lot of people get hurt or confused. You may feel that by being loving, consistent, and attentive, you're doing everything right. But if the other person hasn't emotionally invested to the same degree, your efforts can start to feel one-sided. Worse, they might not even realize how much energy you're giving because it's constant. When attention flows too freely, the person receiving it doesn't have to earn it, and when something doesn't have to be earned, it's rarely respected. It's not that people don't want affection or love, they do, but they want to feel like it means something, and something only means something when it's connected to intention and choice. If you're always there, always calling, always texting, there's no question of whether your attention was a conscious decision. It becomes part of the scenery, it blends into the background, and people stop noticing the things that blend in. Think of how we treat people we admire but don't yet fully know. There's a sense of wonder and discovery. We don't assume they'll respond immediately. We don't take their time for granted. We feel lucky when we get a moment of their attention. That's not because they're playing games. It's because they're living their lives, respecting their own time, and letting connection grow at a healthy pace. That kind of space makes people value the moments they do get. But when your attention is always there, when it floods in like a fire hose instead of being given deliberately, it loses impact. It's the difference between hearing a compliment once a week from someone you care about and hearing it 5 times a day without context. One version feels sincere, the other starts to feel hollow even if it's not. The irony is, the more emotionally available and giving you are, the more likely you are to overextend in situations where the other person hasn't earned it yet. That's where resentment can build. You give more and more, hoping it will finally be appreciated, but it only ends up making the other person pull away or disengage further. And then you're left wondering what went wrong, when all you were doing was trying to show how much you care. The truth is, care must be mutual to be sustainable. When someone hasn't shown consistent interest or effort, giving them all your energy isn't generosity, it's misalignment. Holding back a little doesn't mean being cold or distant. It means preserving the value of your attention by giving it to people who recognize and appreciate it. When you go quiet after consistently showing someone attention, the silence doesn't go unnoticed, it echoes. It raises questions, creates tension, and generates curiosity. Humans are naturally drawn to gaps. When something that was once predictable is suddenly removed, it forces us to pay attention to the absence. That silence becomes louder than any words you could have said. In relationships and dating, this space, when used with intention, can bring clarity not just to the other person, but to yourself as well. When you're always available, always reaching out, always filling the space, the other person doesn't have to wonder what's going on. They don't need to think about how you feel or where they stand with you. You've already provided the answers through constant communication and effort, but the moment you stop filling that space, whether consciously or because you've grown tired of trying, something shifts. Suddenly, there's a void where there used to be consistency. That void can be deeply uncomfortable for someone who has become used to your emotional presence. Silence is not just about the absence of sound. It's about the emotional room it creates. It allows the other person to notice what's missing. It gives them the opportunity to reflect on what your presence really meant. Often, people don't realize the weight of your energy until it's gone. They might have taken it for granted, not out of malice, but because they were never forced to question it. Your silence changes that dynamic. It's important to understand that silence is not manipulation when it comes from a place of self-respect. There's a big difference between pulling back to play games and pulling back to protect your peace. When you stop talking, stop texting, stop giving, it should be because you've recognized an imbalance, not because you're hoping your absence will provoke a reaction. If the reaction comes, it's a byproduct, not the goal. The real value of silence is what it reveals. It shows who notices, who misses you, who steps forward when you're no longer making all the moves. For the other person, this space can be a moment of awakening. It challenges them to consider whether they genuinely care or were simply comfortable. It forces them to make a choice, lean in or let go. And in that space, you get answers without ever having to ask questions. You see how they act when they're no longer being fed attention. Do they step up or do they stay silent too? On your end, the space offers perspective. It gives you time to breathe, to check in with your own needs, to assess whether the connection was actually giving you anything back. Often, when we're so focused on trying to build something with someone else, we forget to ask ourselves if we even want what we're chasing. Silence provides the pause needed to realign. It helps strip away the noise of hope, fantasy, and potential, and lets reality speak. In the quiet, you start to hear your own voice again. This space also shifts the power dynamic, not in a controlling way, but in a balancing way. When one person is always reaching, always giving, the dynamic becomes skewed. The moment you stop, you level the playing field. You give the other person room to take initiative, to invest, to show their intentions through actions rather than reactions. And if they don't, that tells you something more powerful than any conversation ever could. Silence doesn't just make others think, it makes you feel. It allows the emotional dust to settle. What rises in that stillness is often truth. Truth about them, truth about you, and truth about whether the connection was ever mutual in the first place. Obsession is often mistaken for love, but more times than not, it stems from a need for control rather than genuine emotional connection. When someone becomes obsessed after you've pulled away, it's rarely because they've suddenly realized how deeply they care about you. More often, it's because they've lost access to something they believed they had a hold on, your attention. And when a person can no longer predict your actions or rely on your availability, they begin to feel unsteady. That discomfort can quickly turn into an obsessive focus, not on who you are as a person, but on regaining the control they feel they've lost. In many cases, obsession flares up the moment you withdraw. That change in dynamic is jarring to someone who has become used to the rhythm of your affection. It disrupts their sense of control. You were once consistent, perhaps even predictable. You gave freely, checked in regularly, responded quickly, but now there's a pause, now there's space, and in that space, their thoughts start spinning. Not because they miss the real you, the one with thoughts, emotions, and values, but because they miss the feeling of having your attention on demand. This kind of obsession has little to do with emotional compatibility or mutual respect. It's about reclaiming something they feel they've lost. That loss triggers their ego, not their heart. It's an internal narrative that sounds like, "Why isn't she chasing me anymore? What happened to her interest in me? Did she find someone else?" These questions aren't born out of love, they're born out of insecurity and confusion. They want to be desired again, but not because they've earned your affection. They want it because they were used to having it. When a person becomes obsessed after you've gone quiet, it's often because your silence challenged the role they thought they played in your life. They saw themselves as someone who could always get your attention, someone who had a certain level of influence over you. Your decision to stop feeding that belief is what triggers the spiral. Obsession kicks in as a way to regain emotional leverage. They don't necessarily want a healthy relationship. They just want to stop feeling like they've lost control. This is why so many people confuse obsessive behavior with love. They see the sudden interest, the flood of messages, the unexpected calls, and they think, "Wow, maybe he really does care." But the reality is that someone can be desperate for your attention without being genuinely invested in your well-being. Desire doesn't always equal depth. Sometimes it's just a knee-jerk reaction to rejection or disinterest. The danger here is mistaking intensity for sincerity. Obsession is intense. It's urgent. It can feel flattering at first because it mimics passion. But unlike true affection, obsession is selfish. It's not about building a connection. It's about soothing one's own ego. When someone is obsessed, they're trying to fill the uncomfortable space your absence created. They're focused on how they feel, not how you feel, and once they get what they want, your attention again, that intensity often fades because it was never rooted in anything sustainable. Understanding this helps you avoid falling into emotional traps. Just because someone chases you after you pull away doesn't mean they're ready to show up for you. It might just mean they're reacting to a loss of control. Their behavior is not necessarily a reflection of how much you mean to them, but rather how much they relied on having access to you. Obsession that stems from control never evolves into real connection unless both people are willing to be honest, vulnerable, and emotionally available for the right reasons. There's a significant difference between playing games and having standards, and that distinction can change the entire course of a relationship. Many people confuse detachment or emotional boundaries with manipulation, but the truth is, not giving constant access to yourself isn't a strategy. It's a reflection of your self-worth. When you stop overextending, when you stop being endlessly available to someone who's not showing up for you, that's not you trying to make them chase you. That's you protecting your energy and valuing your peace. Playing games is rooted in insecurity. It's about control, appearances, and trying to get a reaction. Having standards, on the other hand, is about emotional maturity and self-respect. When you have standards, you're not sitting around trying to figure out what move will make someone miss you. You're not calculating how long to wait before texting back or pretending to be busy when you're not. Instead, you're choosing to focus on people who meet your level of effort and interest. You're choosing not to pour energy into connections that feel one-sided. You're choosing to be with someone who reciprocates, not someone who only reacts when they sense you slipping away. Standards are not about making someone chase you. They're about choosing not to chase someone who won't meet you halfway. People sometimes think that pulling back will make a man more interested. And sure, sometimes it does trigger attention. But if your silence is rooted in a plan to manipulate a response, the connection will always be built on shaky ground. You'll always wonder if they're truly invested or just responding to your distance. But when you pull back because your needs aren't being met, because the communication feels draining, or because you feel undervalued, that's not manipulation, that's alignment. You're stepping away not to create tension, but to regain clarity. That's what standards look like in action. A person with standards doesn't beg to be chosen. They don't cling to mixed signals or try to decode inconsistent behavior. They observe, they take the data they're given and make decisions accordingly. If someone ignores them, they don't respond with more effort. They take the hint and re-center their focus. This is not coldness. This is wisdom born of self-awareness. Standards don't need to be shouted or enforced aggressively. They're quiet, they're firm. They speak through your actions, through what you tolerate and what you walk away from. And here's the truth. When you start living by your standards, you naturally filter out the people who were only there for convenience, the ones who only showed up when it was easy, or when they needed something from you, or when they felt like it. These people may call you difficult, unavailable, or accuse you of playing hard to get, but that's only because they're uncomfortable with the fact that they can no longer control how much of yourself you give away. Your standards disrupt their ability to take you for granted. The beauty of having standards is that it removes the need for games entirely. You don't need to be less available to seem more attractive. You don't need to pretend you're unbothered. You simply become someone who is genuinely unwilling to settle for less than mutual effort, emotional consistency, and respect. And that energy is magnetic, not because it's calculated, but because it's real. When someone meets you with the same level of integrity and emotional readiness, no games are needed. There's no manipulation, just clarity, connection, and shared intention. When someone is genuinely interested in you, they don't need to experience your absence to realize your value. They recognize it in your presence, in your words, in your energy. True interest doesn't require a disappearing act. It doesn't thrive on silence or depend on distance to grow. It thrives on consistency, mutual curiosity, and emotional availability. If someone only starts to pursue you when you've pulled back, it means they were never really paying attention in the first place. They were responding to the shift, not appreciating the connection. There's a common pattern in dating where people only seem to wake up once they sense you slipping away. It can feel flattering at first. Suddenly they're texting more, calling, trying to reinsert themselves into your life. But when you look closely, that behavior isn't a sign of depth. It's a reaction to discomfort. It's driven by ego more than emotion. Because if they truly valued the connection, they wouldn't have needed to lose access to it before realizing it mattered. People who are emotionally ready and genuinely interested don't play that game. They don't need reminders. They don't need to feel your absence to want to be part of your life. When someone is truly into you, you feel it in how they show up. It's not just about how often they contact you, but the quality of their presence. They make an effort. They ask real questions. They want to understand you, not just keep you interested. They don't breadcrumb you or keep you hanging on a thread of mixed signals. They're consistent, and that consistency builds trust. When someone doesn't need you to pull back to recognize your worth, that's when you know their feelings are real. On the other hand, someone who only reacts to your withdrawal is often more interested in regaining control than building a relationship. Their sudden attention is usually short-lived. Once they feel reassured that you still care, that they haven't truly lost you, their interest fades again. It becomes a cycle. You give, they pull away, you pull back, they chase. It's exhausting, and more importantly, it's not love. It's a push and pull dynamic based on insecurity and avoidance. A healthy connection doesn't require tests. You shouldn't have to go silent to be noticed. You shouldn't have to withhold affection to earn someone's effort. If someone needs you to disappear to realize what you meant to them, they weren't seeing you clearly when you were there. Real interest is proactive, not reactive. It doesn't wait for crisis or distance. It shows up consistently because it wants to, not because it has to. You deserve to be with someone who sees you clearly the first time. someone who doesn't need time away from you to understand your value, someone who appreciates you not just when you're quiet, but when you're showing up fully, when your emotions are visible, when your presence is real. Because interest that only appears in the face of loss isn't grounded in appreciation, it's rooted in fear of disconnection, and fear isn't a strong enough foundation to build anything meaningful. People sometimes confuse effort triggered by your withdrawal as passion. But there's a difference between fighting for a relationship and reacting to the fear of losing attention. One is rooted in care, the other in ego. If someone is only motivated by your silence, what they miss might not be you. It might just be the feeling of being wanted. That's why true interest doesn't require distance to be activated. It's steady, it's present, it grows in the light, not just in the shadows you leave behind. You are not a prize handed out at the end of a chase, and your value is not defined by how much someone wants you only after you've pulled away. When you treat yourself as the standard, not the exception, everything about the way you engage with people changes. You stop accepting breadcrumbs. You stop twisting yourself to fit into someone else's life who isn't making space for you. You stop confusing attention with intention. Instead, you begin to recognize that your energy is a privilege, not a guarantee, and that anyone who wants to be in your life should be showing up with clarity, consistency, and care, not confusion. When you act from a place of standards, you're no longer waiting to be chosen. You're choosing. You're observing how someone treats your time, your boundaries, your openness. And if those things aren't respected, you're willing to walk away, not because you're trying to prove a point, but because you've made peace with the idea that not everyone deserves access to you. That is the mindset of someone who has decided to become the standard. Not someone who needs validation to feel worthy, but someone who already knows they are. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that if you just hold on long enough, if you give a little more, if you're patient with their confusion or silence or mixed signals, that eventually they'll come around. But the truth is, when someone really sees your worth, they don't leave you guessing. They don't make you earn their affection through silence, distance, or emotional games. They meet you where you are because they recognize what's in front of them. They don't need to lose you to value you. They value you because you carry yourself in a way that makes it clear you don't accept anything less. This isn't about being cold or guarded or difficult. It's about self-respect. It's about knowing that love should feel safe, not stressful. That being with someone should bring out your peace, not your anxiety. And when someone is really aligned with you, they won't need to be convinced of your worth. They'll see it in how you move, in your presence, in the quiet confidence that says, I know who I am and I know what I bring to the table. That's what happens when you stop performing for affection and start expecting reciprocity. You naturally filter out the ones who are only interested in the chase, the control, or the convenience. You stop entertaining people who are inconsistent, who are only present when it's easy, who disappear the moment you ask for more. You realize that anyone who needs to be manipulated into giving effort was never going to sustain it long term anyway. Being the standard also means you don't waste time explaining your worth. You let your boundaries speak for you. You let your absence do the talking when your presence has been taken for granted. You don't chase closure because you understand that silence is its own answer. You don't compromise your peace just to keep someone interested. You choose yourself not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. When you embody this mindset, the right people recognize it. They feel the difference. You're not trying to prove anything. You're simply being. And that energy is both rare and powerful. It draws in those who are ready, who are emotionally present, and who don't need to be pushed or tested to show they care. Because when you are the standard, you stop settling for being a reaction to someone else's indecision, and you start becoming the reason someone decides to rise. When you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, it becomes clear that the dynamic of the more he ignores you, the more obsessed he becomes, isn't about love, it's about power, attention, and the way human psychology responds to uncertainty. But the real takeaway isn't to use that knowledge to manipulate or strategize your way into someone's heart. The point is to recognize what's real, what's sustainable, and what actually serves your emotional well-being. It's easy to confuse obsession for love, to mistake someone's sudden attention for emotional depth, but obsession isn't commitment. It's reactive, not intentional. It's driven by ego, not genuine care. The relationships that thrive aren't built on a game of hide and seek. They're built on mutual effort, respect, and emotional availability. You shouldn't have to disappear to be noticed. You shouldn't have to withhold your love just to get a taste of someone else's. And if someone only steps up the moment you start to walk away, then what they're chasing isn't you. It's the version of themselves they see slipping out of control. That's not connection, that's reaction. It's not about who you are. It's about how your absence makes them feel about themselves. This is why your power lies in your standards, not in your silence. It's not about pulling back to create scarcity. It's about pulling back because you refuse to keep giving where there's no genuine effort being returned. Your value doesn't rise when you become less available. It was already there when you were showing up fully. But if someone couldn't see it when you were present, then their attention in your absence doesn't suddenly make them worthy of your energy. Anyone can want you when you're gone. The question is, who chooses you while you're still there? You deserve more than temporary interest. You deserve consistency, depth, and someone who doesn't need to be provoked into appreciating you. And you get there not by waiting to be noticed, but by standing firm in your worth. By remembering that your love, your attention, and your presence are not tools for validation. They are gifts. Not everyone should have access to them, and certainly not those who only recognize their value after they are taken away. Let others become obsessed if they want. Let them spiral in the silence they created by taking you for granted. But don't let that become your measurement for connection. Don't let reactive attention replace real love. You are not a moment of regret or an afterthought. You are not someone who has to vanish to be seen. You are the standard, and the right person will never need distance to realize that. So stop chasing, stop shrinking, stop trying to earn what should be freely and eagerly given. You don't need to be less of yourself to be more desirable. You only need to be honest, grounded, and unwavering in your self-worth. The one who's ready for that will never make you question it, and when that person shows up, it won't feel like a game. It'll feel like peace.